"Freeze, hands up." The command cut through the cold rain like a blade. 3 security officers burst from the darkness, flashlights slicing through the downpour beams, landing on the face of a woman unlocking the glass doors of a building. She froze, keys still in hand, white light reflecting in her steady eyes, not fearful, only stunned. Her name was Lena Carter, 38 years old, a renowned architect returning late from a business meeting. Her silver Tesla still idled warm beneath the storm. She never imagined that coming back to her own building to check a faulty electrical room would put her at the end of a gun barrel. "What are you doing here?" The sharp, arrogant voice of Ray Dorman, head of security, cut through the rain. Under the flickering neon light, his face was taut eyes, scanning the black woman before him in a long coat of quiet elegance. "This is private property. You're trespassing. I have the keys. I'm the Lena didn't finish." Ray's rough hand seized her wrist, twisting hard, forcing her onto the freezing ground. She heard the clatter of metal, her architectural drawings scattering across the wet floor, the paper soaking instantly. One of the other guards grabbed her handbag and began rummaging through it. "Don't resist," Ray barked. "You're under arrest for unlawful entry. Unlawful entry into my own building." Lena's hoarse laugh broke through the sound of rain catching in her throat. The words made one younger guard hesitate, his expression uncertain, but Ray's voice hardened. "This building belongs to Arden Group, not you." The flickering light caught Lena's silver Patek Philippe watch, gleaming against the chaos. In her mind, everything slowed, the echo of boots, the heavy breath of the men, the metallic scent of rain-soaked stone. She realized what they saw wasn't a celebrated architect who had just signed the biggest contract of her career, but a black woman who didn't belong. In that moment, Lena felt a humiliation she thought she had outgrown the inherited pain her mother had carried after being fired for not fitting the company culture. She inhaled deeply, forcing calm into her voice. "If you need proof, check the ownership records. My name is on them." Ray ignored her, signaling his men. One pulled out a phone to film, smirking. "Looks like we've got ourselves another luxury imposter tonight." Lightning split the sky behind them, illuminating Lena's face, cold, unyielding, absolutely in control. She didn't scream or plead, only stared straight at Ray, her gaze like a blade cutting into him. For a fleeting second, he felt something unfamiliar fear. When the police arrived, Lena sat against the wall, wrists bound with plastic ties, rain drenching her hair and clothes. A young officer approached, his tone tentative. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Dr. Lena Carter." She replied evenly, "Owner and chief architect of this building." He hesitated. "You said owner." "That's right. And this entire incident is on camera." A gust of wind swept through the open door, sending a folded ownership certificate tumbling from her coat pocket onto the wet floor. Ray bent down his eyes, locking on the embossed seal and bold signature beneath. His mouth went dry. Before he could speak, thunder drowned his words. Lena closed her eyes briefly, her breathing steady, letting the rain wash over her face. In her mind, tomorrow was already clear. She wouldn't just clear her own name, she would make the entire system answer. She didn't need to shout to reclaim her voice. The truth alone would make the world tremble. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the towering glass panels of Arden Square, casting reflections across the stone floor, still marked by last night's rain. The air felt heavy and cold, as if the building itself had not yet washed away the stain of injustice. In her 12th floor office, Lena Carter sat silently, the coffee on her desk, long gone cold, her gaze distant through the wide window. Her phone vibrated non-stop waves of messages and calls, flooding in colleagues, reporters, clients, even strangers she had never met. Overnight, a short video showing a black woman handcuffed inside a luxury building had gone viral. The hashtag Justice for Lena was everywhere that morning. But what kept her silent was not shame. It was the icy anger coursing backward through her veins. On her screen, a headline glared, "Security guards tackle black woman for trespassing in her own building." For a moment, she caught sight of Ray Dorman's face in the footage, his barking orders, his arrogant glare. The internet was furious, thousands calling for his dismissal. Yet Lena had no desire to become a symbol of victimhood. She wanted to turn this into a lesson for an entire system. Her phone rang again. On the other end was Janelle Rivera, her longtime attorney and college friend from Columbia. "I just saw the video, Lena. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Lena answered quietly, her tone sharp as glass. "But they won't be. Meet me at 11. I want every ownership document and the full security contract for Arden Group on my desk." She hung up, stood and slipped on her blazer. The woman in the mirror staring back at her looked anything but fragile. Her dark skin caught the morning light, her face calm, her eyes burning like fire beneath ice. As she stepped out of her office, employees in the lobby paused to greet her, some with pity in their eyes. She gave a brief nod, keeping her pace steady. Each step she took was a declaration she didn't need. Pity she demanded respect. On the drive to the law office, her Tesla glided through New York's restless streets. Lena's thoughts drifted to the long road behind her. 20 years ago, she had been a young woman from Detroit living in a cramped apartment, studying architecture on a scholarship for underprivileged students. Every time she presented her designs, someone would ask, "Did you really do this yourself?" as if her intelligence needed to pass a color test. After graduation, she worked for a major architecture firm, but her ideas were constantly credited to white colleagues. Eventually, Lena quit and started her own small practice from a worn apartment in Brooklyn. 10 years later, Carter Designs became one of the city's most successful young firms. And this year, she had achieved the unthinkable, purchasing Arden Square, the very building no bank once believed she could ever own. Janelle's voice pulled her back to the present. In the conference room, data filled the screen. "I checked," Janelle said crisply. "The security contract between Arden Group and Dorman Security was never officially terminated after your purchase. Legally, they still think they're working for the previous owner." "But they overstepped," Lena replied. "They didn't just suspect, they assaulted and unlawfully detained me. I want to sue them." Janelle nodded. "I've prepared the paperwork." "But Lena, are you sure you want to go that far? You know the media will dig into your past." "Janelle." Lena met her friend's eyes. "If I back down, this will happen again to someone without a camera, without a lawyer, without power. I can't stay silent." The door opened and Marcus Boyd, a black investigative journalist from the Chronicle, stepped in. "Sorry to intrude," he said calmly. "I'm working on a series about racial bias in the security industry. Your story could change the game." Lena studied him for a long moment. "I don't need a writer. I need a witness." "Then I'll be your witness," Marcus said, "and the public will see it for themselves." She nodded. "Tomorrow I'm going back to the building. This time they'll know exactly who I am." That evening, as the sunset bled across mirrored glass towers, Lena stood alone before Arden Square. The wind carried the distant hum of traffic. She drew a deep breath. In that moment, she no longer felt alone. She saw an entire generation behind her, people like her, locked out of power, waiting for someone to open the door. Tomorrow that door would open, and when it did, no one would ever dare to close it again. Monday morning, the media exploded like a storm. The video black architect accused of trespassing in her own building flooded every news outlet from the Morning Post to the Digital Times. Millions of views, thousands of comments. Beneath the sensational headlines was the image of Lena Carter, a woman in a black suit, her face soaked with rain, pinned to the cold floor by 3 security guards. She had become an unwilling symbol of resilience in the face of injustice. Yet while the world erupted in noise, Lena chose silence. She gave no interviews, issued no statements. Instead, she sat in her 12th floor office, morning light glinting off an unfinished architectural model. Outside, reporters crowded the building entrance, microphones raised like a wall of metal. Inside, Lena sat with her arms crossed, her eyes distant. "You should release a statement," Janelle said, dropping a thick folder onto the desk. "If you don't speak up, they'll write the story for you." Lena smiled faintly. "I don't need them to write it. I'll tell it through action." The door swung open, and Marcus Boyd stepped in, his shirt creased from working all night on his article. "Bad news, Ray Dorman just gave an interview. He said you acted suspiciously, that he was only following protocol." Lena looked up, her gaze cold. What kind of protocol allows someone to humiliate a person simply because she doesn't fit their expectations? Marcus set down his camera. "Do you want me to publish the story today?" "Not yet," she said. "Let him talk a little more." The more lies he tells, the easier it will be to expose them. She walked to the glass wall overlooking the street below. The city pulsed with endless motion, yet in the center of the media storm, her breathing remained calm and steady. That afternoon, Lena returned to Arden Square. Barricades had been erected to hold back the curious crowd. Over her shoulder hung a leather bag carrying copies of her ownership documents. Marcus followed, camera ready. Reporters turned their lenses toward her as she crossed the security gate. Ray Dorman was waiting in the lobby, his face caught between anxiety and false composure. Adjusting his tie, he stepped forward, his voice dry. "You're not permitted to enter. Management hasn't verified your identity." "Really?" Lena asked, setting down her bag and pulling out the folder. "This is the official ownership certificate of Carter Designs. I own this building. If you need confirmation, call my attorney or check the records at the Manhattan Notary office." Ray stared at the document stamped with a red seal, his expression frozen. It could be fake. "I'll need to verify with Arden Group." "You can call," Lena replied evenly, "but you won't get an answer because Arden Group no longer exists. I purchased all its assets in March, which means you're currently standing in my building doing your job under my roof." The air grew thick. Everyone nearby fell silent. A young female reporter lifted her microphone, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Carter, are you officially confirming that you own this building?" Lena turned toward her, eyes sharp as glass. "I'm not confirming. I'm proving it." Marcus raised his camera, capturing the moment. The photo appeared on the Chronicle within minutes, captioned, "The Power Behind the Glass." His story spread like wildfire, hundreds of thousands of shares in hours. By late afternoon, the city council had ordered an internal investigation into Dorman security. Old files began to surface, revealing that over the past 2 years, Ray had reported suspicious black individuals 19 times, not one found guilty. An internal note read, "Monitor Ray Dorman exhibits signs of racial bias." That night, Lena sat alone in her apartment, the glow of her laptop illuminating the room. Her inbox overflowed with messages of support from architecture students, businesswomen, and people of color who had faced discrimination. One line made her pause. "You're not just building structures, you're rebuilding trust." She smiled faintly, though her eyes carried a trace of sorrow. Trust was not built like concrete and glass. It required the force of impact to take shape. The next morning, headlines broke again. The Dorman security headquarters was surrounded by reporters, the parent company's stock tumbling fast. Ray appeared on live television, pale and stumbling over his words. "I was just doing my job. I didn't know who she was." Janelle turned off the TV and looked at Lena. So what now? Lena closed the file in her hands. Now they'll learn exactly who I am and why they should never forget it. In that moment, she understood that this fight had grown beyond herself. It had become a battle for everyone who had ever been doubted simply for existing in a different skin. And she, the woman once forced to her knees in the rain, now stood tall in the light, ready to bring the truth into the open once and for all. Wednesday morning, the conference room of Rivera and Associates glowed under bright white lights. The air was thick tense, like the calm before a storm. Lena sat at the head of the long table, her hands clasped, eyes fixed on the screen, where Janelle was presenting a stack of newly obtained internal documents from Dorman Security. Here, Janelle said, her voice steady but firm. This is their risk assessment system, an internal algorithm that assigns a suspicion score to employees or visitors based on behavior and appearance. Lena frowned. Appearance? Janelle nodded. They call it a demographic risk variable, but in practice, it gives lower scores to people of color, especially young women. From the corner of the table, Marcus Boyd's recorder light blinked red as his eyes lit up. So they're using artificial intelligence to legitimize prejudice. Exactly, Janelle replied, and Ray Dorman knew about it. He signed off on the protocol 4 months before your incident happened. Lena leaned back in her chair, her breathing slow, memories flickering to life, the countless times she had been asked to show ID at buildings. She herself had designed the skeptical looks behind polite smiles during presentations. She had endured it alone, believing that if she worked twice as hard, the world would eventually change. Now she understood the problem was never effort, it was the system itself. Marcus spoke quietly, his tone grave. If you'll allow me, I want to document this entire process, not to create a scandal, but to prove something that some people fight with truth instead of shouting. Lena nodded slowly. Do it. But I want control over the story. No cuts, no embellishment. The truth is powerful enough on its own. At that moment, Janelle's phone rang. She put it on speaker. We just got word, said a voice on the other end, low and urgent. The City Trade Council is launching a preliminary investigation into the former Arden Group. There are suspicions they covered up millions in financial losses and used their security company to monitor employees, not to protect assets. Lena raised an eyebrow. So Dorman Security wasn't just racially profiling, they were helping hide corporate fraud. It's possible, Janelle confirmed. And if it's true, this is much bigger than we thought. The room fell silent. The sound of rain against the glass filled the space. Lena closed her eyes briefly, her mind weaving a plan, bold, dangerous, inevitable. I'm not just filing a discrimination suit. I want the financial fraud investigated too. If necessary, I'll work with the FBI. Marcus looked up almost incredulous. You're turning a civil rights case into a federal investigation. Lena's smile was faint, but sharp as steel. I'm not turning anything. I'm just lifting the curtain so everyone can see what's been hiding behind it. They wanted me to bow my head instead. I'll make them look up. By afternoon, she and Janelle drove to the district attorney's office to file a formal request for a joint investigation. The hallway was wide and sterile, the white lights casting a clinical glow like an operating room. A young clerk reviewed their documents, his eyes widening when he saw the name on the application. Dr. Lena Carter, owner of Arden Square. Yes, she said calmly, and the person who was unlawfully arrested there. The man said nothing, simply nodded and disappeared into the inner office. The tension hung heavy like the air before thunder. Janelle turned to her softly. Are you sure you're ready for the storm that's coming? Lena's gaze shifted toward the rain-splattered window. Storms don't come to destroy, she said quietly. They come to wash away what's rotten. That night, in her penthouse apartment, she opened her laptop. Her inbox was flooded with messages from civil rights organizations. Some called her a new symbol of justice. Others requested interviews, and some wrote only a few simple words. "Thank you for not staying silent." Lena read each one slowly, her heart heavy yet steady. She didn't feel pride, only a deep sense of responsibility, a strange weight as if history itself were standing behind her, urging her forward. Downstairs, Marcus called with an update. The video from this morning hit 20 million views. Dorman Security shut down their comments, but the more they delete, the deeper people dig. "Let them see," Lena said, her voice low and resolute. "They need to see not just my face from that night in the rain, but the eyes of everyone who was ever forced to look down." She closed her laptop and stood by the window. The rain had stopped. The city lights shimmered against the glass, reflecting in her eyes, deep, bright, unyielding. The fight had only just begun, and this time Lena would not be standing alone. The New York sky had turned silver gray by late afternoon wind, howling through the glass towers with a sound that felt like echoes from the past. In the 17th floor office of Carter Designs, Lena Carter stood before a whiteboard covered in diagrams and red arrows. Each line was a connection linking Dorman Security Arden Group and 3 shell financial companies. At the center, one name was circled in bold: Hendrik Wallace, former CEO of Arden Group, the man behind every confidential contract. "This is the link," Lena said, her voice steady but tense as a wire. "They use the security company to funnel internal data out of the system, hiding the flow of money into anonymous accounts." Marcus Boyd sat nearby with his laptop open to a financial tracing program and nodded. "I found Wallace's tax records. He pulled out of Arden right before you bought the building, but Dorman Security signed a new $2 million contract with no defined deliverables." Janelle stood leaning on the table. So Dorman Security wasn't just racially biased, they were a front for money laundering. "If we can prove the link, they'll face not just lawsuits, but criminal charges." Lena said nothing. What she felt wasn't triumph, but a bitter ache. She thought of all the times she had been dismissed on her own projects of colleagues who told her she was lucky to be the face of diversity. They never understood that success for a person of color often carried hidden scars, the constant strain of fighting against a system built to doubt you. "I need to speak to someone," Lena said at last, a former Arden employee named Patrick Liu. He worked in data security and was fired for unclear reasons. "I've heard he kept copies of internal records." Marcus looked up. "You're meeting him alone." "Yes. If I send a lawyer, they'll get suspicious. I need him to trust that I'm not coming for profit, but for the truth." That evening, Lena met Patrick in a small cafe in Lower Manhattan. He was Asian thin, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. When she introduced herself, he hesitated before whispering, "I know who you are. I saw the video." "Then you know I don't fear confrontation," Lena replied. "I need your help to prove something that Arden Group and Dorman Security didn't just cross moral lines. They broke the law." Patrick glanced around nervously, his voice trembling. "Do you know who you're dealing with? Wallace has ties to high-level officials. I was fired after discovering their camera data wasn't being stored normally. Some of it was encrypted and rerouted through hidden servers. Do you have proof?" He opened his bag and placed a hard drive on the table. "I kept a copy just in case. But if I give this to you, my life as I know it is over." "No," Lena said softly, her eyes unwavering. "If you give it to me, your real life begins. I'll make sure you're protected." She returned home late, the hard drive heavy in her bag, not just with data, but with meaning. Janelle immediately called in her tech team to analyze it. Hours later, rows of encrypted files appeared on the screen, one folder labeled Internal Review Footage Restricted Access. When they opened it, The room fell silent. It was surveillance video from the very night Lena was arrested, but longer than the publicly released clip. In this version, Ray Dorman was seen answering a call just before ordering her detention. The voice on the line was faint but clear enough to catch, "Don't let her photograph the 14th floor." "There are documents there," Marcus whispered. "My God, they knew exactly who you were. They were afraid you'd uncover Wallace's files." Lena stared at the screen, every piece snapping into place. The attack that night had never been about suspicion or race alone. It was a cover-up for a massive financial crime. "Janelle," she said firmly, her voice slow but resolute, "tomorrow we hand this over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I want 2 investigations opened, one for financial fraud, one for discrimination. You're stepping into dangerous territory," Janelle warned. "It's fine," Lena replied calmly. "Danger only scares those who don't know where they're headed, and I know exactly where I'm going." That night, light rain swept across New York. Lena stood by her window watching the city lights shimmer on the wet streets below. In the reflection, her face no longer looked like that of a victim, but of someone carrying a torch through darkness. Deep inside, a quiet but fierce determination rose. If the system had been built on prejudice, she would be the one to rebuild it brick by brick. The next morning, the city seemed to hold its breath before a storm of news. Reports that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had officially taken over Lena Carter's case spread across every major network. Every newspaper ran the same image: Lena, in a gray coat stepping out of the federal building, her expression calm, her eyes sharp as a blade. Headlines blazed in unison: "Black Architect Exposes Financial Empire and Racist Security Network." In the office, Marcus Boyd played the live broadcast, the anchor's voice steady through the speakers. "Sources confirm the FBI has launched 2 parallel investigations, one into multi-million-dollar financial fraud within the Arden Group and another into systemic racial discrimination within private security firms." He turned to her, smiling with awe. "You did it, Lena. They can't ignore this anymore." Lena didn't reply. Her gaze was fixed on the window. Down on the street, dozens of people stood holding signs that read, "Justice is not a privilege. Equality is not optional." In their reflection, she saw herself, the woman once forced to her knees, in the rain now standing as a symbol of quiet strength. Janelle entered holding a fresh stack of files. "The FBI is requesting the full data set from Patrick Liu. They're cross-referencing it with Wallace's financial records. But there's more. Dorman Security is trying to negotiate a settlement. They're offering to issue a public apology if you drop the lawsuit." Lena raised an eyebrow. "An apology? They want to turn this into a cheap morality commercial." Janelle nodded. "My guess is they'll also offer a large payout, maybe several $1,000,000. Money can't repair a rotten system," Lena said slowly, her tone calm and cold. "I don't need them to pay for my humiliation. I need them to pay for turning that humiliation into policy," Marcus interjected. "If you win this, you'll change the entire private security industry. But they'll fight back. I've heard Wallace's legal team is preparing to argue that Dorman was simply following protocol and that you misunderstood the situation." Lena turned toward him, her eyes unwavering. "That's what they always say, isn't it? When they can't deny their actions, they deny the victim's reality. But this time, they won't distort the truth, because the truth has shape, it has sound, and it has millions of witnesses." That afternoon, Lena, Janelle, and Marcus attended a press conference in the lobby of Arden Square, the very place where it had all begun. Hundreds of reporters crowded together, flashes bursting like lightning. When Lena stepped onto the podium, the room seemed to still. "I'm not standing here to tell the story of a victim," she began, her voice low but clear. I stand here as a citizen, someone who was hurt by the very system she trusted and someone determined to hold that system accountable. She raised the ownership certificate cameras, clicking like rainfall. This is my building, but right here I was called an intruder, not because I did something wrong, but because I didn't fit their idea of what an owner looks like. The truth is, this didn't just happen to me. It happens every day to people who are doubted, humiliated, and barred from spaces they helped build. The crowd was silent. Her voice grew stronger. Justice is not a favor. Equality is not a choice. We do not need permission to be respected. Behind her, Janelle's eyes glistened. Marcus recorded everything, knowing this moment would echo across America. As Lena stepped down, a reporter called out, "Do you think you're declaring war on an entire industry?" Lena stopped, turned to the camera, and answered, "No. I'm rebuilding the foundation of justice. Because when the foundation cracks, every building falls." That night, her speech dominated every evening broadcast. Clips of her words were shared more than 20 million times in 12 hours. The hashtag Building Justice trended nationwide. On television, Black faces across the country shared their own stories: bankers, engineers, students, doctors. In a dim room elsewhere, Ray Dorman sat before a television, his face hollow. Behind him, his lawyer murmured, "If she keeps pulling the FBI in, you may be called to testify." Ray gave a brittle laugh. "I was just doing my job. I didn't mean any harm." The lawyer's voice was cold. "Sometimes, 'I didn't mean to' is the most dangerous confession of all." Across town, Hendrik Wallace watched the same broadcast. When he saw Lena walking through the glass doors amid shouting reporters, he gripped his glass so tightly it shattered in his hand. "She doesn't know who she's dealing with," he muttered, red wine dripping onto the floor like blood. That night, Lena sat alone in her dark office, the only light coming from the architectural model on her desk, a model of the art center she was about to build. The sound of rain tapping against the window filled the silence, but this time it didn't make her cold. She picked up her pen and wrote the first line of her next speech. "No one is defined by how others see them. We define ourselves by how we rise after being broken." Outside, lightning split the gray sky, and in its brief illumination, Lena Carter's reflection gleamed on the glass. No longer the woman pressed to the floor in the rain, but the owner standing in her own building, ready for the greatest battle of her life. Friday morning, Manhattan blazed under harsh sunlight, yet the air was tense, as if the sky itself was holding back a storm ready to break. At the headquarters of Dorman Security, reporters and protesters crowded the front gates. Inside, an emergency board meeting raged behind closed doors filled with shouting and ringing phones. On the table, a screen flashed news of the FBI's expanding investigation. Amid the chaos, Ray Dorman sat slumped dark circles under his eyes, hands trembling as he held a subpoena. "You'll have to appear before the Civil Rights Investigation Committee on Monday," his lawyer said flatly. "They have evidence you called Hendrik Wallace before arresting Lena Carter." Ray closed his eyes. The night of the storm replayed vividly the flashing lights, the woman's calm voice against his barking orders, and the sudden collapse of his authority. "I was just following orders," he whispered. "Whose orders?" The lawyer's voice cut through the silence. Ray looked up, desperation flickering in his eyes. "The orders of the man I thought owned the building." At that same moment, inside, Carter Designs' Lena and Janelle worked with a team of federal investigators. Screens glowed with data from Patrick Liu's hard drive recordings, internal messages, and most damning of all, a chain of emails between Wallace and Dorman. One message froze the entire room. "Carter is digging too deep. Don't let her reach the 14th floor. Security will handle it. Lead investigator Agent Brown turned to Lena. "Mrs. Carter, do you want us to release this evidence now?" Lena paused, then shook her head. "Not yet. I want them to confess before being exposed. When truth comes from the mouth of the deceiver, it weighs 10 times heavier." Brown nodded slowly. "You're not like the others I've seen in civil rights cases. Most want immediate retaliation." "Retaliation would make me small," Lena said quietly. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to rebuild." From across the room, Marcus Boyd looked up from his laptop. "If you allow it, I'd like to publish part of this story in this week's paper. Not as sensational news, but as an analysis. I want people to understand that discrimination isn't just individual behavior, it's a programmed mechanism." Lena smiled faintly. "Do it. But remember, don't call me a brave victim. Call me the woman rebuilding justice." 2 days later, the FBI's Federal Plaza building buzzed with activity. Dozens of reporters waited outside. Inside, Lena and her legal team were invited to the first evidentiary hearing. In the grand conference room, Hendrik Wallace arrived in a perfect suit, his confidence tinged with arrogance. When he saw Lena, he smiled the polished smile of a man who believed money could plaster over any crack. Mrs. Carter Wallace said smoothly, "I regret what happened." But clearly this was a misunderstanding. The security team acted for safety reasons. You entered the building after hours without notice. Lena sat upright, her expression composed. "You're right, Mr. Wallace. I entered my own building after hours, and that led to me being handcuffed, humiliated, and called an intruder. A strange kind of misunderstanding, don't you think?" Wallace kept smiling. "No one denies your feelings," but Lena cut in, her voice sharp as steel. "But you deny responsibility. Did you call Ray Dorman that night?" The room froze. All eyes turned to Wallace. He gave a thin smile. "I might have called, but I never gave an order to arrest anyone." "You're right," Lena replied, holding up a printed email. "You didn't order an arrest. You ordered them to keep her off the 14th floor. And on the 14th floor was the financial archive, the one containing the evidence of your fraud." Cameras clicked in rapid bursts. Wallace's face went pale, though he tried to maintain composure. "Mrs. Carter, this is a fabrication." Agent Brown stood up. "Mr. Wallace, this email has been verified. Furthermore, data from Patrick Liu's hard drive shows you personally instructed staff to delete the 14th floor surveillance files right after the incident." Sweat gathered on Wallace's forehead. From the corner, Marcus recorded everything the exact moment justice revealed its face. When the hearing ended, Lena walked into the long hallway bathed in golden light. Janelle murmured, "You know they won't let this go easily. Wallace still has political ties." "I know," Lena said calmly, "but real power doesn't lie in connections. It lies in truth." That night, Marcus published a special feature on the front page of the Chronicle Systemic Bias, the Architecture of Injustice. The article went beyond Lena's story, exposing the embedded racial hierarchy programmed into private security systems across the country. Each paragraph struck like a hammer. When computers are trained on prejudice, technology stops being neutral. It becomes the perfect tool to preserve old power. The piece spread like wildfire. Security guards, office workers, and tech engineers across America began sharing their stories. Social media turned into a forum for justice and change. In her apartment, Lena sat by the window, gazing at the city lights, thousands of glowing eyes awake with her. She checked her phone and read the top comment, "No one dismantles a system like this with words alone." But Lena Carter has started taking it apart one brick at a time. She smiled softly, though the feeling in her chest was not relief. The legal battle was only beginning. Ahead lay courtrooms, public scrutiny, and enemies yet unseen. Yet that night, for the first time in months, she felt peace, because she knew justice no longer belonged to her alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever been forced into silence. And as the city slept, the top floor of Arden Square glowed with a new sign, Center for Design and Justice Carter Foundation. The white light illuminated the street where she had once been forced to kneel, standing now as a promise that every structure, no matter how broken, can be rebuilt if the architect dares to dream of a stronger foundation. On Monday morning, before the sun had fully risen over the horizon, Lena Carter stood before the federal courthouse. On the white stone steps, dozens of reporters were already waiting, camera flashes bursting like lightning. Amid the chaos of lenses and microphones, Lena walked slowly, each step measured and deliberate, as if she were walking upon the very foundation she had designed. Her long black coat swayed lightly, her face bare of makeup. Her expression calm, the look of someone who knew she was about to confront something far greater than reputation. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick and heavy. Across from her sat Ray Dorman, his face drawn and hollow, his hands clasped tightly together. Beside him was Hendrik Wallace, still forcing an air of confidence, his suit, immaculate hair slicked back, every gesture rehearsed. In the first row, Janelle sat next to Marcus, quietly observing every detail. When the sound of the gavel struck, the murmurs died instantly. The judge looked around the room, his voice deep. Today's hearing will address allegations of unlawful detainment, systemic racial discrimination, and financial fraud committed by Arden Group and Dorman Security. Lena rose, her posture straight, her voice clear and unwavering. Your Honor, I am not here to reclaim personal dignity. I am here to prove that institutionalized disrespect can corrode an entire society. What happened on that stormy night was not the mistake of one man, but the outcome of a structure built on prejudice and blind power. Her words silenced the room. A reporter in the back nodded quietly, taking notes. Janelle opened her laptop and projected evidence onto the large screen. The recorded phone call between Wallace and Ray deleted surveillance footage and copies of financial contracts filled with suspicious payments. When Wallace's voice played, "Don't let her reach the 14th floor," several spectators gripped their seats. Wallace tried to compose himself, standing to respond, his voice raised but quivering. "I was only concerned for the building's security. There was no discrimination or fraud involved." Lena met his gaze, her eyes sharp as a blade. "If it was about security, why were you afraid of me seeing the 14th floor? And why was the footage from that floor erased the same night?" The air crackled with tension. Wallace fell silent, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Ray Dorman kept his head bowed, avoiding every eye in the room. When it was Ray's turn to testify, he spoke softly, his voice hoarse. I got a call from Wallace. He said there was a suspicious person. I didn't know Ms. Carter owned the building. I was wrong." "Were you wrong because you didn't know the judge asked, or because you didn't want to know Ray said nothing?" And in that moment, Lena saw the truth for what it was. Sometimes harm didn't require hatred, only indifference. The hearing stretched through the morning. When it ended, the judge announced that a full criminal investigation into Arden Group and Dorman Security would proceed. The final strike of the gavel echoed through the chamber, sharp final, but to Lena, it sounded like the collapse of an entire system. Outside, hundreds waited. As she stepped out, the courthouse doors swung open, and a gust of cold wind swept through, lifting her hair. A reporter called out Mrs. Carter. "How do you feel now that Wallace and Dorman have faced trial?" She paused on the steps, sunlight catching the edge of her face. "I don't feel triumphant," she said. I feel sorrow that it took us so long to remember that every human being deserves equal respect. But I believe today is a beginning." Marcus moved closer, camera trembling slightly in his hands. He knew he was capturing a moment that would be remembered, the image of the woman once forced onto a cold floor, now standing in the light, unshaken proud. That evening, the national broadcast replayed the footage with a headline running across the screen, "Carter v. Wallace the Trial, Redefining the Meaning of Justice." From small cafes to corporate offices, people talked about the case. Several companies announced reviews of their security systems and hiring policies. Change began to ripple outward like waves from the first stone dropped in still water. In her apartment, Lena sat before the model of her new architectural center, a project she had once postponed because of the lawsuit. Now she knew it would carry a new purpose, not just as a place to showcase art, but as a symbol of rebuilding trust. She ran her fingers gently over the dome designed to capture the first morning light. Outside the window, New York gleamed like steel reforged in fire. As night fell, her phone lit up a message from Janelle Tomorrow. Wallace faces his second interrogation. They say he's asking for leniency. He might expose the people behind him. Lena looked at the screen, a faint smile forming on her lips. The fight wasn't over, but this time she was no longer walking in the dark. Justice now had a face, and it carried her name. The next morning, the federal building stood like a silent battlefield. Beneath the white stone columns, reporters gathered once again, cameras fixed on the main entrance where Hendrik Wallace would soon appear for his second interrogation. Not far away, Lena Carter stood in a gray coat, her dark eyes calm and unreadable. Beside her, Janelle flipped through a file, her voice low. "He's going to confess today. The FBI already traced the Cayman Islands account." Lena nodded slightly. "Don't call it a confession. Call it a crack in the wall. Once the first crack appears, the structure collapses on its own." Inside the interrogation room, the air was stifling. Harsh light shone directly onto Wallace's face. He looked exhausted, his eyes hollow and defeated. Across the table sat Agent Brown, voice steady, yet unyielding. "Mr. Wallace, the evidence is overwhelming: the secret transfers, the deleted footage, the phone call to Dorman. We only need one thing: who else is involved?" Wallace was silent, fingers tracing the rim of his water glass. A minute passed, then two. Finally, he exhaled, his last trace of arrogance slipping away. "It wasn't just me," he said quietly. "There are people higher up, members of the financial board, who use Dorman security to control data. They didn't want anyone outside the circle to know." Brown leaned forward. Name Senator Robert Hale Wallace whispered, his voice trembling. "He ordered me to stay silent. It all started with his investment fund. The revelation spread like lightning. Within 2 hours, breaking news alerts flooded the airwaves. New York State financial system linked to money laundering network. Hendrik Wallace's testimony triggers federal expansion of FBI investigation. The shockwave reached Capitol Hill. Those who had dismissed Lena Carter as a fleeting media story suddenly realized she had ignited a reckoning. At Carter Designs, Marcus Boyd read the news aloud, his hands shaking. "Do you see this, Lena? A month ago, you were just a victim of wrongful arrest. Today, you've shaken the Senate." Lena smiled faintly. "I didn't shake anything, Marcus. I just told the truth. The truth knows how to echo on its own." That afternoon, the front pages of every major newspaper carried the same image: Lena standing between two glass towers under the headline, "The Woman Who Dismantled a Wall." Marcus's editorial described her as someone who didn't destroy the system but forced it to see its own architecture. Online, she was hailed as the architect of justice. That evening, Lena received a call from an unknown number. A rough male voice spoke. "Miss Carter, this is Senator Hale's office. The senator wishes to meet with you privately to resolve this misunderstanding." She was silent for a moment before replying calmly. "I don't meet with men who treat justice as something to be bargained with. If he has something to say, he can say it in court." Then she hung up. Janelle looked at her concern, clouding her face. "You know they might try to threaten you, right?" Lena let out a quiet, cold laugh. "Janelle. I've been threatened my entire life by doubt, by condescension, by the way people said, 'You don't quite fit the standard.' And yet I'm still here. This time they'll be the ones afraid." Outside, rain began to fall. Droplets tapped against the glass, scattering city lights into trembling ribbons of color. Lena walked to the window and looked down. People still gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs reading "Equal treatment under the law and no justice without truth." Among them, she noticed a little girl holding a cardboard sign written in uneven marker. "My mom said you made her proud." Lena's heart tightened. In that moment, all the exhaustion and pressure seemed to dissolve. She understood that what she was fighting for was not just herself, but for every child who needed to see what justice looked like, not in robes and gavels, but in courage and conviction. Late that night, Marcus sent a message. "Breaking news, Wallace just signed a cooperation agreement. The FBI is preparing formal indictments. Your story is about to close one chapter and open another." Lena read it, leaning back in her chair, eyes drifting toward the glowing skyline. The rain had stopped. She knew this new chapter would not just mark the end of a case, but the beginning of a new foundation, one where justice was not only spoken about, but built by the hands of those once deemed powerless. 3 weeks later, New York's morning sun burned bright, yet the air felt heavy as if waiting for an earthquake. Outside, the federal courthouse lines of reporters and citizens crowded the steps. A massive banner stretched across the square read, "Justice is built, not given." Lena Carter stepped out of her car wearing a white suit, walking slowly but with certainty. No one saw the woman once forced to her knees in the rain, only the owner of the very building that had once rejected her. Inside, the white light seemed to pierce even the hidden corners of power. Hendrik Wallace sat at the defendant's table, eyes sunken, all traces of confidence gone. Beside him, Ray Dorman sat with his head bowed, hands clenched. When the judge's gavel struck, silence filled the courtroom. After reviewing the evidence, the judge declared this court finds Hendrik Wallace guilty of organized financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and complicity in unlawful detainment. The defendant is sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Wallace collapsed forward slightly as if watching himself fall apart. Ray Dorman was then called to stand. His voice was low and cracked. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. I didn't know." Lena looked at him calmly. "Not knowing doesn't erase responsibility. Your mistake wasn't malice, it was blindness. I hope you remember this respect should never come with conditions." The session ended. As Lena stepped out, she was met by a storm of lights and cameras. A reporter called out, "Mrs. Carter, do you feel that justice has been served?" She stopped and looked straight into the lens. "Justice doesn't end with a verdict," she said. "It begins with how we live afterward. Today is just the first foundation." By afternoon, her victory dominated headlines across America. Corporations announced plans to audit their security systems. Universities added the Carter v. Wallace case to their ethics curriculum. Many began calling her the architect of justice. But on the 17th floor, Lena sat quietly before the model of her new architecture center, the Foundation for Equity and Design. Her fingertips brushed against the metallic dome, feeling the chill of the steel, as if touching a future freshly forged. Marcus Boyd entered holding a draft in hand. The headline reads, "The Woman Who Rebuilt Justice," he said. Lena smiled softly. "Don't write woman, write we. Justice isn't built by one person. It's a structure created by everyone brave enough to stand." Marcus nodded, his eyes reflecting respect. As twilight descended, the city came alive in light. Lena stepped onto the balcony, the wind stirring her hair. Below, car lights shimmered like endless streams. She remembered the night of the storm, the shouting, the flashlights, the cold stone floor, then looked up at the building now glowing with her name. Everything had come full circle, but instead of vengeance, she had chosen reconstruction. In her hands was a small plaque soon to be mounted in the main hall. True justice is not punishment. It is transformation. She read the words slowly, her voice calm and warm. Tomorrow the building would open to the public, no longer a symbol of power and fear, but a space for art, creativity, and dialogue. Lena knew the journey was not over, but she had walked through its darkest passage. She turned back inside, switched off the light, and the last glow reflected on her peaceful face. Then, as if sending a quiet message to the world beyond her voice, rose softly in the dark. If you believe one person cannot change the structure of justice, remember every great building begins with a single design. And today, that design has been redrawn,